if it doesn't work, we just say next slide, please, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
That works too. Excellent. All right, folks. I know there are folks trickling in. I am so sorry for all the confusion. We're going to hang tight here for just a moment to let others join us. So yeah, just hang tight. My sincere apologies for the fire drill and all the confusion that I'm likely causing. So yeah, thanks for joining. Hang tight for this moment. All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and get us started since we are slightly delayed here. I think we'll continue to see folks joining us, but just to make sure we have enough time for the presentations and all of your questions and panel discussion at the end, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So thanks, everyone, for joining this webinar and for your patience and understanding as we work through some technical difficulties. My name is Julia Kim. I am the Director of Climate and Energy Programs at the Local Government Commission, and I will be moderating this webinar. This is the third webinar of our series on cooling the capital region from models to implementation, which is really to highlight the great work that we've been, I guess I shouldn't be tooting our own horn, but the great work that we've all been doing with all of our partners on the broader projects on the urban heat island mitigation effort and developing the regional heat pollution reduction plan. That's a project that has been developed and led and with LGC and the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District through Caltrans SB1 Transportation Adaptation Planning Grant monies. We have Ultrastatus who will be joining us to present their findings, and then we also had WSP as part of the consultant team. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump right in to cover some of the logistics here. So due to the large size of the webinar and all the participants, everyone has been muted, but we certainly encourage you to get your audio connected so that you can use the hand raising feature and we can unmute you so you can ask your questions. But feel free to also use the Q&A panel, the Q&A portal, as well as to chat us at any time through the Zoom platform if you have any questions, either for our presenters or if you're needing some support in troubleshooting anything. And again, apologies for the technical difficulties in joining the webinar, but I'm so glad that you're able to be here with us today. So this webinar is being organized by the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative. The collaborative is serving as kind of the host and home for this broader urban heat island project so that we can continue to work with our partners and our members and other organizations and stakeholders throughout the region so that we continue down our path to implementing urban heat island mitigation strategies. Just for folks who are not familiar with CRC, it's a collaborative of local leaders seeking to build climate resilience throughout California's capital region. We essentially bring together stakeholders from across sectors and jurisdictions to find regional solutions to address our shared challenges, from extreme heat to drought, flooding, and wildfires, and much, much more. And our goal is to help members and agencies and organizations within our region. So you can see up on the screen, we are covering the full 6-county SACOG region and helping communities thrive in the face of climate change. Local Government Commission serves as the program administrator for CRC, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And here you can see all of our wonderful members that we have as part of our network. And if you don't see our logo up on the screen, we certainly encourage you to reach out to us or learn more about CRC at climatereadiness.info. We are delighted to be joined by Dr. Haider Taha as well as Torin Dunnavant as part of this webinar. Just wanted to provide a quick introduction before I pass it over to Dr. Taha, who will be our first presenter, and then Torin will follow, and then from there we'll open it up for audience Q&A and a panel discussion. We'll try to save as much time as we can so that you have the opportunity to ask your questions. So Dr. Haider Taha is the president of and scientist at Altostratus Inc., and previously he was a staff scientist with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for 12 years, during part of which he also was a deputy leader of the lab's Heat Island group. And from 2004 through 2011, he was an adjunct professor of meteorology at San Jose State University. His research interests include urban and regional meteorological emissions and photochemical modeling for studying the interactions and feedbacks among meteorology, energy use, pollutant emissions, and air quality. He also focuses on developing and working with new generation fine resolution meteorological models, including highly urbanized parameterizations. Applications of such models include, for example, studying urban heat islands and their mitigation, urban impacted cloudiness and precipitation, heat waves and mitigation, local and regional impacts of climate change impacts, and much, much more. And he has published over 200 scientific papers, reports, and book sections on these topics. Dr. Taha is a member of the American Meteorological Society's Board on the Urban Environment, and in 2010, he received the AMS Editor's Award for the Journal of Applied Meteorology and Climatology. So thank you, Dr. Taha, for joining us. And Torin, I'll go ahead and introduce you now as well. So Torin Dunnavant joined the Sacramento Tree Foundation in the spring of 2017, returning to his beloved hometown after living in Los Angeles for 10 years. So Torin, sounds like you've experienced heat, not just here in Sacramento, but it's down in LA as well, I imagine. And as the Director of Education and Engagement at the Tree Foundation, Torin oversees the community programming aspects of the organization, focusing on constituent engagement, behavior change, communications, and strategic planning. He also worked in the environmental sector for 15 years, previously with Tree People, Friends of the River, and the California Wild Heritage Campaign. And he studied political communications and rhetoric at San Francisco State. So yeah, thank you both for joining us today. As I work to transfer control over to you, Dr. Taha, just want to remind folks, please do feel free to send your questions in at any point throughout the discussion or throughout the presentations. And again, for folks who joined us before, after I said my apologies, just want to again apologize for the confusion that we caused at the start of this, in joining this webinar. So, Dr. Taha, I'll pass it over to you, and just let me know when you'd like me to advance your slides.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Julia, for all the introduction, and hello, everybody, again. So, continuing from the first two webinars, today I thought we'd talk a little bit about the other side of the equation, namely looking at measures that benefit the communities, the urban areas in general, and that also benefit the transportation system. And so in webinars 1 and 2, we talked about cool roads, cool pavement, electrification, EV ownership, and we talked about smart growth, cool walls, and a number of other things. So I thought today we'll focus a little bit more on urban greening, and if there's time, maybe talk about 1 or 2 other measures, and then wrap up by showing how things come together in developing some sort of an initial ranking system. In other words, trying to see what measure to implement where, which one will be more effective, and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So in terms of urban greening, the measures were evaluated at 2 scales. One is the regional scale, which is the 6 counties capital region, which is outlined roughly by this blue rectangle on the right side of the screen. And this is what this domain was analyzed and modeled at 2-kilometer resolution in this study. And the other scale is the project scale or community scale, a very localized type of assessment, and that was done at 500-meter resolution, which I'm going to show later in the presentation. So the first thing to look at in terms of urban greening was to characterize the existing cover, existing tree cover or existing green cover in the region. That is to see what's out there, to get a sense of what kind of cover there is, the range, and also to inform us what kind of mitigation measures would be realistic in terms of greening or increasing tree canopy cover, and where to put things, in other words, to design a mitigation measure. So as you can imagine, there are many studies that looked at canopy cover, characterizing it, quantifying it, and many data sets are available as well. In this study, 2 data sets were used to characterize tree cover or green cover in general. One is a FRAP, which is the Earth-Defined Cal Fire data set. And this was used to characterize only areas confined within urban boundaries, as you can see, for example, in the slide, in the detail on the left side. And this is a 1 meter to 30 meter data set, which is a toggle, basically, tree or no tree. And again, is used to characterize the urban area only. The non-urban areas, which you can see as big white background in this figure, was characterized in this study using NLCD 2011-2016 data, which was also developed by the U.S. Forest Service. And so the 2 data sets were meshed and merged together to provide a continuous characterization of urban and non-urban tree cover, crops, vegetation cover, and so on. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, the data is 1 to 30 meter in resolution. So one of the first tasks were to vectorize the raster data and remap them and reproject them on the model grid as well as the configuration, and then scale up the data to the model grid resolution, so 2 kilometer for the regional scale and 500 meter for the fine scale community level assessment. And I'm providing a square, this little square in black in the middle of the figure, to give you an idea how big 500 meter is, let's say, relative to this area in Sacramento. This is quite a fine resolution grid, if you wish, considering the very large domains that we are modeling in this study. And so the information from the tree cover was averaged and scaled up to these grid resolutions, and then merged with other data sets like impervious cover, roofs, pavements, roadways, urban morphology, geometry data, and so on. And based on that, we developed a grid cell by grid cell or bottom-up approach characterization of the surface as input to the atmospheric model. Next slide, please. And so here's a look at how the data is. Yeah? Yeah, thank you. At the 500 meter resolution. So this is simply a scatter plot of the grid cells in each domain that you can see on the right side. And essentially, this is a box and whisker plot. So the vertical lines in these little boxes that you can see is the median of the tree cover, and the 2 ends of the box are or the box itself represents the interquartile range. And so you can see that the highest cover is in the Sacramento area in domain D07 and D08. And if you look at the scale, you see that it rarely exceeds 0.2 or 0.25 at the most. I mean, obviously there are some grid cells that have 0.8 cover, but it's just 1 or 2 floating around. Most of the largest cover is in the range of, I would say, between 0.18 to 0.25 at the most. You can also see that there are areas such as Placerville on the bottom and Woodland, the second from top, have a low cover. And keep in mind, again, this is only within the urban area. I mean, we all know that, for example, Placerville is essentially in the middle of a forest. But here we're looking only at what's happening within the urban grid cell. And as I mentioned earlier, this is based on the CAL FIRE Earth-defined data in urban areas, and the non-urban area will supplement that with the NLCD cover. Next slide, please. So, by the way, all these details are in the technical report, which is going to be available, I guess, in a couple of months or so. And so after developing some initial characterization of the area in terms of vegetation cover, next step was to develop mitigation measures to increase canopy cover and see what kind of impact it has on the area. And so we're looking at, and again, there are so many different ways you can do that to represent the changes, many metrics, and so on. Here we're looking at an example, which is an instantaneous change in temperature as a result of increasing canopy cover for a random hour, let's say 1 p.m. in the afternoon on July 28, 2015. And this is a region-wide assessment. In other words, the assumption here is that every urban area in the 6 capital region and surrounding did implement a tree canopy cover increase, which is quite an ambitious undertaking, but at least it's a theoretical exercise to get a sense of what kind of impacts, where, and how much we can expect. And again, the more realistic scenarios at community level will be presented later in the presentation. So I'm showing here 2 scenarios. On the left side is 0.1, on the right side is 0.2. 0.1 is what I would like to consider as a moderate height increase in canopy cover, which corresponds to an increase of 12% of the urban area. In other words, 12% of a grid cell or an urban area becomes covered with vegetation. That's what it means. So this is translating that to this big region that you can see in this figure, it becomes an equivalent of something like 2.5 to 3 million, or even a little bit more than 3 million trees, additional trees throughout the region. On the right side, it's about double that, and that's an increase of 20 to 25% in canopy cover, which entails up to 6 million additional trees in the whole region. And this is, to me, an extreme scenario because it's technically not very doable at this point. But again, it's included in this study as an upper bound. And this brings the total cover to 35%, which is some sort of an upper bound per local tree organizations as well as other studies. But it's still lower than some very large numbers I've seen around, up to 40% increase in cover. The other thing that makes me think case 01 is perhaps the optimal or the largest realistic increase is that in past studies of the Sacramento region, the established tree cover in the central area in Sacramento was found to be an average of about 14%. And in many areas that have low cover or newly urbanizing area, the cover is 5% on the average. And so going from 5% to 14% is roughly the ballpark we're talking about, which is 12% increase. And that's the reason why case 01 is probably the more realistic one. So if you look at the scale, you have cooling up to 0.8 degrees Celsius on the left, 1.5 on the right side, which is quite large because this is an average over 4 kilometers square. You can also see there's a green bunch of blobs, especially on the northeastern part of the domain. Just like any or many control measures, you have positive and negative effects. And so this causes some warming, although the warming is small in scale, in geographical coverage, and in magnitude. And it does happen downwind of urban areas, but it's small compared to what we see in terms of cooling. Next slide, please. The other thing we looked at is how, or actually the best way to say it, is the net effect of incremental increase in canopy cover. That is the impact on microclimate and temperature here of increase in canopy cover resulting from growth in the canopy and or additional canopy over time. And so obviously, as I mentioned, there are pluses and minuses, but this is the net effect. And you can see that it's always positive, meaning a decrease in temperature. So what you see in this figure is an example for all hour and area-wide averages. In other words, an average of an average. And that's the reason why the vertical scale of the cooling is a little smaller than you would see in other pieces of information. On the horizontal axis, you see a number of subdomains, regions, and again, on the vertical axis is the change in temperature or cooling. And on the right side, you see the definition of the cases del 01 through del 2. And to make it easier, I also provided the corresponding increase in canopy cover. So the first level is an increase of 3.4% in canopy cover and goes all the way down to 25% increase, which corresponds to the extreme scenario I just mentioned. And so what you see here is relatively expected. As the canopy increases, the net cooling increases as well. But you see sort of different responses to the same change in canopy cover. So let's say, for example, we look at Placerville and Sacramento. They are next to each other in the figure. Going from 3.4% canopy cover to 25% canopy cover in Placerville takes you from a cooling of about 0.1 degrees C to all the way to something like 0.6 degrees Celsius. In Sacramento, the same change in cover takes you from about 0.15 or 0.1 degree C cooling to 1 degree Celsius, meaning for the same change in canopy cover, the cooling in Sacramento is larger than the cooling in Placerville. And among many different reasons, including different geographical characteristics and climate, the size of the modified area is important. So, for example, in Sacramento, if you increase canopy cover by a certain amount, because the area is larger, each area or each grid cell, if you wish, or each neighborhood benefits from the fact that the surrounding neighborhoods are also cooler. So the air arriving at your location is already cooled down. So the larger the area, the larger the effect, and that's the reason why you have these different responses to the same changes in canopy cover. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at the project-specific or the community-level increase in canopy cover, which is more realistic than assuming the entire region will do tree cover change. To give you an idea of what this corresponds to is roughly adding 300 large trees per neighborhood. A neighborhood is roughly a quarter to half a kilometer square, and this corresponds to increasing canopy cover by about 8%. And here we're looking again at all our average changes in these locations for a random period, which is June 1 to 15, 2015. And the scale is not shown, but obviously it goes from 0 at the white to the maximum cooling in dark blue. And this is the value I'm reporting these figures. And the tree cover was increased in different communities or areas based on comments and feedback we got from LGC, the district, AQMD, the project technical advisory committee, the cities and communities in the area. And so, for example, downtown Marysville was an area of interest, Woodland, AB 617 communities in Sacramento, the bottom two graphs were of interest. And so the assumption was that increases in canopy cover will occur there. And you can see the maximum change here going from about 1.8, 1.4 to 0.9 in the lower right part, just to give you a sense of what kind of cooling is possible. Next slide, please. The same information here is for Folsom, El Dorado Hills area as well as Placerville. And again, you can see cooling according to the model up to 1.5 degrees C, 1.3. So it sounds like anywhere between 1 degree and 2 degrees C is possible cooling with canopy cover under these assumptions in these areas. Next slide, please. So look like I have to accelerate a little bit. One of the questions that came up during the project was how do trees, let's say over a parking lot, compare to other mitigation measures, for example, installing solar PV panels over a parking lot. And so one of the tasks in this study was to model the impact of solar PV and their effects on near-ground temperature, so we can compare these two things, solar PV and tree cover. And there's a number of parameterizations or parameters that you can look at, for example, the cover of the solar panels, where they're located, their albedo, their conversion efficiency, and so on, and as well as the albedo and the properties of the surfaces you're putting them on. So it's quite a large number of variables. And again, this is all explained in the report. I'm showing a couple of examples here to show the impact of change in conversion efficiency. But the bottom line, I guess, like in time, is the what I mentioned on the bottom. The results suggest that solar PV cover at 50 to 60% near the ground, I'm not talking about roof level, we're talking about, let's say, parking lot, is about 1/2 as effective as increasing canopy cover from 8 to 12% in the area. So that kind of gives you an equivalence. However, if you increase the conversion efficiency to make it 30%, in other words, you have more efficient solar panels, then the equivalence becomes relatively 1-to-1. In other words, in this case, the solar PV at 60% cover has the same effect as an increase of 8 to 12% in vegetation cover. Keep in mind, I'm talking about 60% versus 8 to 12%, so it's not exactly 1-to-1, but I'm saying half versus exact equation or correlation. Next slide, please. So I guess I'll spend a few minutes to say how all these things come together. How do we develop some sort of ranking? How do we, let's say, formulate an initial idea of where to put what or what measures would be effective where and so on? And so I'm showing here an example that is done for every region in the domain, but here we're looking at Sacramento, and again, this is the regional level 2 kilometer. What I'm showing is the impact of a number of different measures shown on the right side of each, listed on the right side of each figure and defined at the bottom of the slide. But let's not worry about the definition. What I want to show is that, for example, the top figure, this is the effect of mitigation measures, namely reducing air temperature as an average over all of these areas within Sacramento. And it's an average over, I think in this case, all 6, the time is given on the slide. So this is the average of all 6 a.m. hours in different periods in 2013 to 2016. So if you look closely at the figure, each bunch of bars, there is a date in there. Each bunch, each set of 5 bars corresponds to a period of 2 weeks. And so you have all of these 2-week periods in 2013 to 2016, and they're ranked by the effectiveness of the measures, as you can see on the right side. So to keep it quick, at 6 in the morning, the most effective measure is the red one, number 1, which is the very high or the extreme increase in canopy cover, which I keep saying is not a very realistic scenario, but we're including it here for evaluating maximum benefits. Then this is followed by number 2, which is the blue line, and that's a combination of albedo and vegetation cover. Then followed by number 3, which is a moderate increase in cover, then by a number of other measures in albedo and so on. If you look at the bottom graph, which is hour 1 p.m., you see the order is reversed. Now, number 1 is case 31, which is a combination of albedo and vegetation cover. Number 2 is a tie between high albedo increase and high vegetation canopy increase. And number 3 is moderate albedo, and number 4 is moderate canopy increase. The point I want to make is that the order of the effectiveness of the measure switched between day and nighttime because the measures work differently. Vegetation cover tend to have an hour or day-round effect, whereas the albedo measures have more of an effect during daytime. Next slide, please.
And Haider, I thank you so much so far, but if we could possibly speed through the next one so that we can pass it over to Torin and save as much time for Q&A.
Let me just, I'll go fast. Okay, next slide. Again, we're doing that for a different period from 2 to 8 p.m., and you can see the ranking at 3 p.m. Next slide, please. And here looking at all hours, and each one has a different set of priorities. So where do we go from here? We combine all this information, we average all of this period, and we go to the next slide, please. So you see a table like that, and if you can see on the top, there are different regions, and on the vertical axis, you have all of the scenarios listed and their ranking or their priority. Which one is more effective, going from number 1 to 5 or black to white is most to least cool air producing measure, if you wish. And on the left side, at the risk of sounding a little naive, I'm showing how each of these, why do we look at different times of day? Because each of them might have an implication or might be relevant to a different application. For example, for heat wave purposes, you might want to look at hour 6 in the morning and the all hours metric at the bottom. If you're a utility, let's say you're interested in afternoon peak load, you're looking at hour 2 to 8 p.m. in the middle, and so on. I'm going to wrap up, but basically this shows that certain measures are consistent across all hours. Others vary from 1 hour to an hour and from area to an area. So it gives you an idea at your location which measure can be most effective. Next slide. And this is a picture looking at current climate versus future climate. Again, you can see your location, the measure, the time of day, or the range of hours, and which one is more effective than the other, and whether the measures are the same or their effectiveness is the same in current climate versus future climate, so you can design measures that work either now or in the future. And I guess I'll stop here. Thank you, Julia. Back to you.
Thanks, Haider. I appreciate that. And again, as Haider noted, we'll be packaging all of the findings from the study together and sharing that with the group. And we'll also, of course, make this presentation available after this webinar. And we've been getting a few questions. We're going to hold off on that until the panel discussion. I encourage folks to continue sending those along. And with that, Torin, I'll let you share your screen and and share about the great work that Sac Tree Foundation is leading.
Great. Okay, so I believe, is everybody able, Julie, are you seeing my slide deck now?
I am not.
Okay, well, let's just jump, if you can.
Oh, sure.
I'm trying to, but if we can just jump over to you. Oh, no, here we go. There we go. Share it. I'll click that button. Great. That should be doing it, I hope. Does that look okay?
Yeah, just go ahead and on the top where it says display settings, go ahead and stop your display so we see the full screen, and then you should be good to go.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Yep.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share. So, what we wanted to do today was paint a picture from Dr. Taha's very in-depth research, and then think about what are the community applications. The Sacramento Tree Foundation is working throughout the Sacramento region on implementing urban forestry or canopy renewal projects. And so I have a couple of specific examples to share. So the Tree Foundation, for those of you who don't know, was established in 1982. We have a wide variety of programs that focus on improving the urban environment for folks. And trees are certainly the major part of that. Sacramento has been tied to its trees for a very long time, thanks to a lot of effort of a lot of different organizations and people. But the Tree Foundation is constantly working with people across the region on trying to improve it. So over the summer, we had an opportunity to not only participate in this heat work that the SB1 opportunities provided, but also connected with Dr. Vivek Chandas at Portland State University. And we did a citizen science project where we chose a random day in August, and we were lucky enough to choose the very hottest day of the year to drive around, had about 12 volunteers drive around the region on 3 different JAGs and get models for what the human experience is for heat by putting basically temperature gathering monitors on the cars as they drove around at a certain speed. And so just what these 2 different examples are sharing is the way that heat changes throughout the day. And I think it's not a big surprise, but what I'd like to call people's attention to is as the day goes on, the more under-canopied or the more disadvantaged communities are feeling the impact of the urban heat. So South Sacramento and North Sacramento, as well as eastern parts of the county, are starting to really cook as the day goes on. And so for us, as an organization that's been around for a long time, we've known, looking at the canopy of the region, that it's essential to focus on those areas. But this, new study that we've done and the work that Dr. Taha is doing is elaborating on that even further. So, just to make sure that that's clear, in the communities of Sacramento that have less trees, it gets hotter. There's some nuance to that for sure, but that gives us a charge to figure out how to grow the urban canopy in those specific areas. And another element that is certainly worth paying attention to is the fact that when there's less canopy, there's worse health outcomes for folks. And so some research that we participated in a few years ago, we came up with this really interesting metric. This is based on adult health outcomes, but if the canopy is different by 10%, the health outcomes vary drastically. That if your neighbor has less trees, you're more likely to be obese, you're more likely to suffer from diabetes, you're more likely to suffer from asthma. And so that as well really gives us a moral imperative to focus our work on communities that have less trees than those that have more. SacTree's been around for a long time. We have a wide variety of programs. We start at the seed level with our acorn gathering program and our in-classroom seed to seedling program. We restore wildlands with volunteers and with staff. We teach folks about how to maintain trees once they're planted in the ground. And then some of y'all are familiar, our newest program where we actually, when trees are being removed from urban spaces, we actually have a mill in South Sacramento to turn those trees into beautiful artisanal lumber and continue to retain the carbon that those trees captured in their life. But the programs I want to talk about are two, the ones that I think focus most on the urban heat issue. So the first one is our long-standing Sacramento Shade program, which we've done with SMUD for the last 30 years. It's the most intensive residential shade tree program there is in the country. We know that 90% of the opportunities to plant trees in an urban space are private property, so we definitely need to support residential tree plantings as best as possible. And so in that 30-year program, we've planted over 650,000 trees during that period of time. And in a very intensive way, we are able to go to people's homes, talk to them about where trees would be ideal to plant at their homes and the exact best species to plant that are climate adapted. We will then deliver the trees to the community members or to the residents and give them as much information as possible about how to plant the trees. And then we'll work with people into the future on how to take care of those trees, sending them reminders about watering, restaking, mulching, things like that. So we've done that program, since 1990, and but we don't see though an uptick in necessarily those under canopied communities. So that makes us rethink about, okay, well, we want to keep making sure that these trees are getting planted because regardless of which neighborhood, it's always a net upside to planting trees in communities. But we do want to continue to think about how to get into other neighborhoods as well. I do want to make one other note about the Sacramento Shade Program. It originally was engaged by SMUD as an energy savings program, which obviously planting trees adjacent to homes on certain sides of the home will do that very well. They can drop energy savings or they can create energy savings of a great amount. But actually in the last few years, we've been able to shift the focus or the primary metric that we evaluate our performance from specific energy savings to actual carbon sequestration and carbon use avoided, because that actually allows us to think about planting in more than just adjacent to the home spaces. Urban cooling that comes from trees isn't just from shading homes, it comes from transoevaporation and also just shading open spaces as well. And so we've been able to severely improve the way that we're going about that program. We've also updated the species list because of that. So the way that we are focused as an organization on working in under canopied communities now is through what we call our Neighborhoods program, which works with community leaders or people that just want to take a step forward in their own neighborhood. We are looking, when we're in those specific communities, to find ways to amend all of those Sacramento Tree Foundation programs to best fit those neighborhoods, whether it's just a different way of communicating about our work, changing the time of day that we're working on it, or holistically overhauling how we go about doing it to best fit that neighborhood. And then the goal throughout all of that programming is to grow awareness about the tree foundation, the need to plant trees in communities, how best to do so, and how to care for them afterwards. And so, we have a wide variety that we're doing that work, but, this photo we have here is Fatima Malik, who's a wonderful community champion in Del Paso Heights. Fatima wanted to have planting events throughout her community, so we were planting here at Robertson Park with a wide range of community members and folks from the city. And that was the best way to, to try to grow our programming in that specific neighborhood. So we work with Fatima year over year and are trying to grow champions like her throughout the Sacramento region. Because, it's just, it's a pretty stark situation. Some neighborhoods, have lots of trees and others don't, but each one is unique in the way that and why that is. What's the plantable space in each neighborhood? What is the soil like? And so when we are getting to a granular level, when we're thinking about what's unique to Arden Arcade, what's unique to South Oak Park, by working closely with those community champions, they can really translate about what needs to change about what we do, so we're not just sort of assuming our one-size-fits-all model is going to be best. So we, over the years, have managed to engage a variety of different communities. This map here shares what our most recent wide array of initiatives are. You can see that we're throughout the Sacramento County area, which is our primary focus because we are using Sacramento Shade's tree distribution as a big backbone for our neighborhoods work. So it's in the SMUD region, or most of Sacramento County. And you can see that we've got a wide array of communities that we're working in. Most of these are actually funded by different funding sources. It could be the state of California, it could be the county of Sacramento, it could be the city of Sacramento, or the city of Rancho Cordova, for instance. What those funds allow us to do is hire staff that can develop those relationships with community leaders and start to figure out how to amend our programming, how to grow the tree canopy in those neighborhoods, and how to make the most positive impact. And that takes place in a lot of different ways, but just as an example, here's a picture from last weekend when we just completed our second annual community leadership workshop. We had folks, 90 folks from all over the region come together to think about, okay, if I wanted to do this in my neighborhood, how would I do it? And not just planting trees is the answer. Certainly that's the primary driver for the Tree Foundation, but the tools that we're working through to engage community members also play out in a lot of different ways. It can be used as an opportunity to more deeply engage elected officials and understanding what remediations are needed in that neighborhood in a variety of different ways. It can increase community safety. It definitely just works through an interconnected process for people to engage with each other. So this, is something that we are very proud of. It's developed a lot over the last couple of years. But, it's plain and simple that change has to happen. The urban heat effects are going to become more and more dramatic for folks. And we want to galvanize this work as much as we can. We're excited to be a big participant in the City of Sacramento and City of West Sacramento's Mayor's Climate Commission and established a goal that should be codified in the next couple of months to grow the canopy in the cities of West Sacramento and Sacramento to 35% canopy by 2045, which would be a huge increase. As Dr. Taha was showing, that 12% uptick, will have a very dramatic effect. But I do want to point out the fact that, the neighborhoods we're talking about, South Sacramento, is 5% canopy coverage. So we're not saying that we just want to uptick by a certain amount of it. We want South Sacramento to get to 35% because we believe that all of those health benefits, all of the other benefits that come from trees should be felt equitably by the Sacramento region. And so for us, we will continue to focus, on the communities that have the lowest canopy and finding, through our community engagement model ways to do that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Torin, let me go ahead and I'll kind of just get the panel discussion screen up, and then we can jump right into questions. So we have a few questions for each of you, but please do feel free to answer any of them. So I think this one is for you, Dr. Taha. Question from Tom Phillips. I gather you're using satellite measurements. How well do they characterize measurements of urban air temperature and radiant temperature at the ground surface? He notes that he recalls that some European studies demonstrated there was a fair amount of error in satellite measurements.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Tom, for the question. I can see it on the screen as well. No, I'm not using any remote sense data in this study. It's all prognostic modeling, atmospheric modeling. The only place where the satellite data come in is in characterizing certain surface properties like tree cover or, for example, urban geometry like spacing between buildings, orientation of streets. But as far as characterizing air temperature or radiant temperature, effective temperature, in other words, it's all based on modeling, no satellite data. And I'll be happy to explain more how we validate the model to make sure it's performing well, it's capturing all these intra-urban features. I'll be happy to talk some more about that. But I guess to answer your question, no satellite data was used.
Excellent. Thanks, Haider. And then a question for you, Torin. In the work that you're doing through the Neighborhoods program, how much of a concern is water use and water consumption of trees that get planted? Is that something that you're hearing from residents at all?
We hear it from residents, largely around the concerns of the cost of watering trees. Certainly, in comparison, the benefits that trees give folks monetarily or otherwise outweighs. So, it is, but it's important for us to be, close enough to the community to understand what people's concerns are, because it can be, I don't think I can afford to water this. I don't think I can afford to pay for tree maintenance down the line. I'm concerned with safety. We hear all of those things. We feel like we have answers to share with people about that. But also, the more we hear them, the more we can think about alternate solutions. Like, could we work with local water providers to give rebates to people that live in under-canopied communities to water their trees? Or could we find ways to utilize public funds to maintain mature large trees in under-canopied communities? So we're constantly listening and trying to figure out more ways to work with folks.
Excellent. Thanks, Torin. And then back over to you, Dr. Taha. How big, and possibly Torin, something you might be able to answer as well, how big are the impacts of increased tree planting on surface air humidity, including diurnal effects? I might have butchered the pronunciation.
Yeah, I mean, this is a function of many weather variables like the wind, the temperature, and the available moisture at the surface, etc., and the shading from the trees themselves. But overall, the numbers I see are smaller than 5%. So, for example, if your initial relative humidity, and of course this, as the question is well posed, it changes from nighttime to daytime, so there is more effect at nighttime. But it's generally under 5%. 5% means additional percentage point. In other words, if your relative humidity is 50%, at the most it becomes 55%. But it's a very good question because it changes by location, by time of day, by weather conditions. But it's almost always under 5%.
Excellent. Thank you. And a question for you, Torin. As you're engaging with residents, are you seeing that most people are wanting to plant trees in their backyards, or is there an interest in tree planting in the front yard where it can also help to shade trees, streets?
I don't know. It would be pretty anecdotal for us to share. We don't study that too carefully. Really, it's, we're planting in whatever open space is available. I know that there's been some research about, people are more likely to want to have fruit trees in their backyards and maybe, shade trees or ornamental flowering trees in their front yards. But it really, quite honestly, the difficulty is finding the space to plant. Part of the reason that we see certain communities have less trees than others is because the plot size is smaller. And certainly in new neighborhoods, it's a real battle for any kind of space to plant trees altogether. And so, we'll also need to look at, what are the development guidelines for homes and for properties to allow for plantable space.
Thanks, Torin. question for you, Dr. Taha, from Bill Dean, who I imagine you've worked with before. Do you have results for cool walls?
Oh, yes, Bill. Actually, we might have even talked about that last webinar. Yes, looked at cool walls on top of all of the other measures, like cool roofs, cool pavement, etc. And they do seem to have an effect, obviously, depending on time of day, where the sun is coming from, and what orientation of wall you're looking at. But they do have significant effect, meaning, 1 degree C in the canopy, within the urban canopy, 1 degree C cooling is something that's quite possible. So at the very localized scale, let's say near the building, around it, it has a significant impact on air temperature. Above the canopy, above the urban canopy, above roof level, obviously the impact becomes smaller. But yes, and there is a lot of results. And again, I keep saying this, it's available in the report as well. I can see a question here, if I can answer it. What's the definition of a large tree?
Sure.
I'm sorry?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Very quickly, it depends on the application, but basically I've seen literature say a large tree, the crown area is 65 square meters, medium tree is something like 30 meters square, and a small tree is something like 10 meters square. However, if you go outside in Sacramento, especially, for example, the picture that Torin just was showing, if you go to Cesar Chavez Park, you see trees that have crown area of something like 150 to 200 meters square. So the definition of 65 square meters, which is used in the modeling here, is really not that big, but that's what the definition, if you're asking me, that's the definition of a large tree, 65 square meters. Thank you, Julia.
Of course. I know we're running low on time. We're going to get through as many questions as we can. We're getting good questions coming in through the Q&A function and the chat portal as well. Keep those questions coming. If there's anything we can't get to, we'll ask our panelists to answer that afterwards, and we can share written responses. So now over to you, Torin, a couple questions. One, are there any curb cut options or improved stormwater management options to improve how to ensure the trees are getting the water they need? And then two, do you ever run into pushback from law enforcement who want no trees in high crime areas to improve their line of sight? She notes that this has been an issue in Long Beach with trees being either removed or not allowed to be planted due to crime concerns, which is a huge equity issue. And I will note, my gosh, that's very concerning. So Torin, I'll let you answer those.
Yeah, I think dynamic stormwater ideas can play a very positive role in helping to irrigate trees. So curb cuts, which I know that this region's played with a bit, could work out really well. There is not a specific initiative to institute those. As far as I know, I think that the regional planners are thinking about those things on a case-by-case basis, but certainly could play a very positive role. Yeah, the public safety and community design issue is really problematic, especially for the most under-canopied neighborhoods. We've encountered this question most when it comes to talking to business districts, that we'll engage them to say, you have this amazing boulevard, it could be so much more enjoyable, would increase retail traffic and overall community health if we were to have a strong canopy, along your boulevard. Would you like to engage that? And there's generally concerns from business owners, from business districts, and from local law enforcement saying, a tree allows for criminal activity to occur. And I think in ways it becomes pretty absurd. I've heard people say, oh, well, they can hide their illicit materials in the trees, or they can hide behind the tree and then jump out on someone, where there's very little evidence to that being the case. Two other concerns, like it provides a hospitable space for homeless people, which is kind of a sad concept, but is a real concern for business districts right now. But quite honestly, there's just so many benefits that come from planting trees that show, it increases community safety. A well-planted street is much less likely to have criminal activity on because it informs folks that are considering engaging in such activities that this is a well taken care of area that people are on the lookout for bad activities. And so, it's just, there's so many concerns that we hear that I think, come from fundamental scares about dealing with nature in a public space or in a urban space, that, we just have to be able to react to each issue directly, share the evidence when we have it, but also, to continue the conversation and find community members that are going to push it forward, because there's always reasons to say no, but if you have one really active, voice, that's going to really overcome those barriers.
Excellent. Thanks, Torin. And then let's do one final question. I think for either of you, has there been any serious deliberation concerning how the various cooling strategy recommendations will change in light of increasing climate variability impacts over time?
Okay. I'm not sure about deliberation, but I guess it's something at least I've looked at in this study, and something we look at in general, that is how these mitigation measures actually, that was the purpose of the last slide I showed, how they rank today, which one is most effective, which one is least effective per area, per location, and how that changes, or the ranking changes in the future. So for each area, there's some change between now and a certain number of years. Let's say in this study we looked at 2050. So between now and 2050, the climate change, the drivers of these local microclimatic characteristic changes, and so the ranking of the measures will change, yes. And again, the last slide I showed, if you remember, is a bunch of checkered boxes, like a spreadsheet with colors. That was the purpose of it. But fortunately, I would say 70% of the measures ranking right now under current climate are still valid in the future, except for a few locations or a few measures that change in order between now and then, which is expected. But I don't know if you mean large-scale deliberation. I'm not aware of that, but I know that every study, including this one, look one way or the other, directly or indirectly, at the changes in climate and how that is responded to by these measures. I don't know if, Torin, you have anything you want to add?
I mean, my insights are very focused on urban forestry, and just I would say from my experience over the last 15 years working in the environmental sector, all I'm seeing is a greater interest on a massive scale of having some remediation occur. And for us, it really goes to the African proverb of the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. And so we're seeing an accelerated interest in making change happen. And so regardless of the solution, I think we always want to encourage people to not let the circumstances over-define action and just get into action, and deal with whether or not we could have done something better later and continue to improve as time goes on.
Excellent. And maybe if I don't know, Torin, if you have just another minute, just one final question, and maybe we can capture that in the recording. How can we plant large trees next to sidewalks? Does the structural soil enable the planting of large trees?
Depends upon the tree, but there's a lot of thinking around various systems. Silvacells is one that I recall people talking about that would encourage root growth to avoid harming the infrastructure or allowing for more rubberized pavement to allow for some root action to occur. I mean, I think the city of Sacramento has done a heck of a job working with the large trees that we inherited or were planted very early on, and continuing to make sure that our sidewalks and streets are safe. And we need to make sure we are planting, the largest trees possible. So, looking at new technology or looking at solutions that work really well for other places is something that I know a lot of the folks in the urban forestry community are looking at, or in the infrastructure community. So it's a great thing that we need to continue to work on.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. I so appreciate it. There are questions asking about contact info, so we'll certainly share that with folks. There's also another question in regards to what the next steps are after this study, this project. We're actually not even in the 3 webinars that we've conducted, we are not even covering the other half of this project, which is the Regional Heat Pollution Reduction Plan and an implementation strategy, identifying very specific measures and opportunities that local government agencies and other organizations can pursue. So we really see this project and the study as the beginning. We'll be working through the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative to engage with our members and engage with other partners throughout the region to see how we can really move the needle on the ground. We certainly don't want to have this model, the modeling results or the plan or the implementation strategy sit on a shelf. So that's a big reason as to why we've been including this under the collaborative's umbrella so that we're able to help, help to facilitate change once this project closes at the end of this week. So just want to thank everyone again for joining this webinar despite of the technical difficulties. Huge thanks to you, Dr. Taha and Torin, for joining us for this webinar and providing your presentation. And we'll be following up with the slides, their contact info in case you want to get connected to our panelists, as well as a link to the recording of this webinar. And stay tuned for more. This is just the beginning, and we hope that we can work with you and engage with you moving forward to implement these strategies. So thanks again, everyone, and that's a wrap.
Thank you.